Big day here at my shop. We have a little box right here that's from a company that includes a man in the box. And what this is a pre-production piece of the new 2019 Honda Monkey MNNTHBX Mtake. It's the new intake system for the Honda Monkey. So this is a pre-production piece for MNNTHBX. I know they're for sale on the website, but I don't think customers are receiving them yet. So I received this one a little bit early. I'm not going to focus too much on the unboxing because it might not be indicative of what everybody else gets. So don't focus too much on this. But as usual, nicely packaged box. We have some clamps, the breather filter. And I went with the DNA option for the filter. This is the part that you'll probably see the most. We won't focus on showing you that right now because it'll be on the bike. And of course the actual intake itself here, which is custom made or specifically designed for the Monkey. And it's a silicone intake system. It looks like at least an inch and a half maybe. Size tube, and there's the mounting bracket already hooked into the intake, so this does not look too difficult, but I will go over the factory manual instructions on how to remove the intake just so we have the actual official method of taking that off, and hopefully that'll help you guys along the way and installing your intake. So let's get to it. So I invested in the Honda service manual for the Monkey bike. So my thoughts on this were, I can figure stuff out, but I didn't know the torque values on a lot of things. And reading through this manual, there's a lot of info that you probably wouldn't have known about. And one of the things I learned with the Grom was that there's an air screw on these air intakes, and it's not a carburetor, but it kind of works like it in the throttle body. So there's some interesting little facts and stuff in here that you could definitely benefit and at least feel more comfortable about when you're working on your bike. So I invested in this, and what I'll be doing, hopefully it helps out, is going through what the factory says you should do as far as these processes. And whether I do it that way or find an easier way, we'll just go about it when we get to that. So the first step in this process is the air cleaner housing removal and installation. Remove the garnishes. I don't see any parsley or anything on this bike. It's kind of funny that they said garnishes. So what they consider a garnish is that black housing that's surrounding the air filter assembly. So it says remove the screw. Looks like there's a screw on the bottom. Slide the garnish forward and remove it. Installation is reverse. We're not putting that back on. So screw on the bottom, slide it forward. Let's do it. Let's find these screws underneath the airbox. Garnishes. I would probably have said shroud or something. So there's one on each side. I guess garnishes make sense because you garnish a dish with something unnecessary. And to me, this whole box, it's pretty gratuitous. So we slide this forward. There they go. And I'll do the other side, and then from there we'll see what the directions say. Next up on the list, disconnect crankcase breather hose 1, crankcase breather hose 1, and fuel breather hose 2. Fuel breather hose right there. So here we have the crankcase breather tube, and on the bottom here there's a little what is that thing called? A little spring clamp that's on there, but the springs were facing the other way, but it just pulls off anyways. Next step, disconnect the IAT sensor 2P black connector 3. So connector 3 right there. So the IAT sensor, which is a intake air temp, is kind of tucked in here underneath the gas tank. So it's a little bit hard to see right there. That looks like it's the connector with the 2 prongs and the gray insert. Next step in the process, remove the bolts so looks like there's 2 bolts up here, just to the right and above left of where the air intake temp sensor was. So we're gonna take a 10mm and just grab those 2 bolts. These are special bolts too, so don't lose them because they have like a little flat shoulder standoff on them. Just not your ordinary 10mm flange bolt. Next stage of the process is to release the spark plug wire from the guides. You see the spark plug wire has some guides that are connected to the air filler or the air cleaner intake hose. And then I'm going to combine it with the next one. Loosen the air cleaner connecting hose band screw 2, which is right there underneath, and disconnect the connecting hose from the throttle body. So this whole process is going to remove the intake hose from the throttle body. And then the last one is 3, remove the bolts. Looks like there's another 10mm bolt up there. Spark plug wire from the guides. It's like molded in little hooks there, it's pretty cool. And then underneath that, got a Phillips head for the band clamp. That's in there pretty good. Make sure you have the right size screwdriver for that. So I got a sharper bladed screwdriver. It broke it loose. So that's in there pretty good, but it's just a band clamp, so you don't need to take it all the way out. And then disconnect the hose from the throttle body. It's on there a little tight because it's rubber and it's probably never been taken off. And then you have the 10mm bolt underneath here. Once again, another special shoulder bolt, so don't lose that. Next stage of the process, release the boss 1. Looks like there's a rubber grommet boss from the grommet on the stay. So looks like we're gonna pull down the whole airbox there. And the next installation is the reverse. So this is our last step. So it's a little hard to see, but the rubber grommet that they're talking about is right here, and all it is a mount just to hold this big airbox assembly up. So we're just going to pull it up from that, and it should loosen the whole assembly. So we got it loose, it pops up, and it looks like the next challenge is probably just going to be getting the box out of the way. It looks, turn the wheel here, get the fender out of the way, kind of just twist it out of there. Box is loose. Just finagle the air intake pipe out. It's loose, there it goes. Don't try to pull the pipe from the box because it's sealed in there with some sort of glue. You'll break it. And here we go. So now that we got the monstrosity off of there, we're going to take a look at what we had on there and what we're going to put on there. This thing is just massive. It's a unit. Obviously you saw it on the bike and it's the first thing you see about the bike and you're like, what in the world's going on with that? This is Honda's way of making sure that this bike gets clean air all the time, no matter what you're doing with it. The air goes in here, goes into a box, goes through a panel filter, comes up through this intake tube back into the throttle body. This is doing the same thing, but with a more freer flowing filter, less restriction, and obviously a bigger intake pipe. So if you look at the comparison here, you're breathing through a snorkel with that, and you're breathing through basically several size times bigger pipe. So clearly you're going to get more air, and that's the goal of this system. Also, just how it cleans up the look of the bike, there's no doubt that this is just going to make the whole thing look a lot better than this. Two facets of this: more air, more power, less bulk. 3 facets. So let's get this thing on and check it out. One step of this process that you might forget about is you're going to have to change the air intake sensor from being originally in the box to this mount right over here. So don't forget to remove the air intake temp sensor, IAT sensor, from your original box, and then go ahead and mount it on the bracket. It's going from internally mounted to externally mounted, but the goal is the same thing. It's just to read the ambient air temperature coming into the motor. Alright, so we mounted the IAT sensor onto the new Mtake, and it just externally mounts there. It's hidden away and tucked away neatly. First thing I thought when I did this with cars was like, how am I going to externally mount a sensor? Well, these air intake temp sensors, they don't have any sort of exposed elements to them. They're just it's like a solid sealed plastic. I honestly don't know how they read the temperature, but nothing's exposed to the elements that's going to damage the sensor. So this is pretty common and not something you need to worry about. So the original airbox has a mount here, and I'm going to go ahead and remove this because it's not needed anymore with the filter, and that's just two 10mm bolts. But be sure to put the bolt on the left side here back in, because that is part of the bolt that holds down the throttle body to the cylinder head. It's a pretty long bolt that goes onto that one side, so can't really mix that up. It's a little difficult to get out too. Looks like the plastic's kind of in the way for the throttle body cover. Put it back in, tighten it all back down, and rock and roll. So my plan of attack for putting in the intake is to not try to do it all in one piece, because you're just going to have to snake it all through there. So I'm going to disconnect the mount for the air filter, and then first attach it to the throttle body, and then go from there. You really want to make sure that your band clamp is oriented correctly so you have easy access to that bolt to tighten it, and then just snake it in from there. Just right down on top of the throttle body inlet. It's a little tricky to get it all lined up and make sure it's on there correctly, but it's just a matter of working the silicone intake hose where it needs to go. And once you get it on to where it should be, grab your 9/32 socket or a Phillips head. I always try to use the socket just to make sure I get some good clamping force on this here. This intake tucks up nicely under the tank, and way less space consuming than the stock intake so far. So we're going to now install the air filter mount. It's a nice little well-engineered piece. So the first thing we're going to do is reattach the IAT sensor. Just goes right there, and this is going to live right here. They included this plastic spacer, and this is going to go on the forward side of that mount, because it looks like the bracket had a little bit of a offset alignment on it from the factory. That's how it was supposed to be. So lastly, we're going to want to connect the silicone intake tube to the air intake bracket here, and don't forget, like I did already, to put your band clamp on the silicone for that side too. Okay, so I got my band clamp up there and tightened up. Make sure you put that bolt into an angle that you can tighten it and loosen it easily, which I had it pointed down towards the front wheel. Okay, so take your Allen key and tighten the very quality Allen hex bolts that they provide with their kit. This is a nice touch because the stock bolts definitely couldn't be reused because of their flange and shoulder that they have on them. So instead of just throwing in some random 10mm hex heads that are industrial looking, these capped head hexes have a nice finish to them. Next up, we're gonna put the DNA filter, it's like a K&N type of filter, onto the side of the bracket. And this all fits together very nicely. It's an offset filter, so the intake is on one side, so I mean you can probably mount it both ways, but I'm sure it's designed to tuck in and hide the air intake temp sensor that's on the back there. So that is the way that I'm going to mount it. So the intake is all in and the filter is mounted. I mounted the filter facing rearward to tuck it all in, and I put the 2 clamp bolts on the bottom so I can get at them later at a decent angle. We'll pan out here and you can see the filter tucks in nicely underneath the tank. And I think our last steps are to just put the breather filter on the crankcase vent. So let's go ahead and do that. So I'm going to take the crankcase breather and then route it behind this other line. Go ahead and find it again. Pop the uni filter onto the filter. Pop the hose onto the uni filter, and then just kind of find a nice spot up in the tank to tuck it away. Might hear it clanking around a bit, but if it's a problem, then I'll find myself a better spot for it. But in the meantime, this is going to be out of the way, and I don't really want to see it, so hopefully this works out. So for the fuel tank breather, the purpose of this was to just draw fuel vapor away from the gas tank because it's a sealed gas tank. So instead of having like your vented fuel cap like you would on a dirt bike historically with the carburetor, this system's going to work a little bit different. So I'm taking this fuel breather hose and I'm going to slide it behind the other hoses. And what I want to do is kind of place it so the opening of the hose is sitting near the filter, so it's still going to perform its job per se, to where there's a vacuum in this area where the filter is, and it's going to go ahead and hopefully draw some of those stray vapors out of that system and into the intake where they were originally destined to go. So hopefully that kind of restores the system to its original design, because we don't want to plumb into the intake hose or anything. It's really not necessary, in my opinion. So I'm going to go ahead and tuck the crankcase breather back there. And once again, that filter is in Never Never Land up here underneath the tank. Can't even see it. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and call that good. You know, you're not going to get rid of some of these hoses here unless you figure out a different solution. So pretty happy with this setup right now. Let's go ahead and give it a try.